When you're using a storage account in Windows Azure, one of the main three ways by which you can store that data is using tables. The other two are queues and blobs, and we'll talk about those later, but let's have a more detailed look at how tables work within your storage account. So the first thing you have to do is set up the account. You can't just go into Azure and create a table without having the account to hold that table, if you will. So that's step one, is to create your account. From that point, when do we use tables? Well, they're ideal for large amounts of unstructured or non-relational data. One of the other options for storage is to just use a SQL database. That's not part of your storage account. That's a separate object within Azure, and that's typically when you need an actual related database, several tables that are connected to each other. Tables simply remove that relational component. It's just a large amount of data. It doesn't have a particular structure, and usually good for when there's a lot of the data. When you set up your tables, there's these components that need to be established. There's the key value pair, which effectively is the field itself, and then what the value is, such as customer name, Mr. Smith. That might be an example of a key value pair. Partitions are how you're going to divide up the table. You don't necessarily just have to store a single column or a single field, so we can create partitions to divide data from one another. Just like you might take, several folders and place them all into the same file drawer, that creates partitions that keep the data separate and easy to find. Row keys are unique identifiers from that point, so that we can uniquely identify each record in the table, and that's pretty common in any kind of tabular storage structure. So when you're designing the table, this is an example of what it might look like. We have the property type that you can see here, and that's where we set up the partition key and the row key. Now, those two are required, and we do actually have to set those values. You see that there is a third property type of timestamp, and while that's required, we generally don't have to do much with that. It just inserts that value automatically. From that point, you see that there's a few different data types that we can support, and we'll go over those quite shortly. And then from that point, we actually assign a value to each one of those. So product, for example, would be a partition key, and the row key 001 uniquely identifies a particular product, and then the timestamp just might be some sort of standard date format, such as month, day, year. So what it might actually look like when we actually put data in there, you see we've got product happening here as the partition key. And then the row key of 001 is our first record. And then product number 2, this is our second record. But what you see over and above that is that at the entity or value level, there can actually be more than one entity. Name and price can be set up within each partition key. And however many entities you want is up to you. But take note, what you can do still within the same table is to have a different partition key. So there's our division right there. We're seeing supplier here and product here. So within the supplier partition key, you can actually reuse the same row key. So we're seeing the same values here, but it's because it's in a different partition. It's unique to that partition. Then same deal, we can create the entities and their values over here. And again, however many entities you want, whether it be one or dozens, that's up to you. Now, there are a few restrictions. For starters, the data types. There's several standard data types that are supported, and you see there's string and binary, 64 kilobytes maximum in terms of their size. Then we can also have Boolean, date, time, global unique IDs, integers, both at 32 and 64-bit sizes, and double if you need something like currency. The entire field and row size also has some limitations. There's a maximum of 255 fields, and that does include the 2 partition and row keys that you already defined. So those count against the 255 limit. Then any one individual partition key and or row key must be under 1 kilobyte. So when you're defining your tables, just bear those restrictions in mind. Now, one other main thing to consider with the partition keys is actually how they're stored. data that resides within the same partition will actually also reside on the same physical hardware. Now, again, you don't really have control of that. That's managed up within the Azure data centers, but anything that's in one single partition will reside on the same hardware set. What that results in is that partitions may actually scale independently of each other because there could be a different hardware set for a different partition. So it might look like this. We have our product partition key, and then that might reside on whatever physical hardware set that they might decide to implement. And then we might have our supplier partition key, and that could be on a different physical hardware set. And they may be the same size, they may be different. It obviously depends on the amount of data. But what can happen over time, of course, is that maybe our business grows. We may acquire a very large amount of products, but yet the suppliers supplying those products may not change at all. So with this larger data set, we may actually end up requiring more physical hardware to support that. So that's what it looks like with respect to them being able to scale independently of each other. But again, that's managed by Windows Azure, so that's not really something that we have to concern ourselves with. But when it comes time to design your tables in your storage account, all of those things need to be kept in mind.